Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Justine Browning. I'm an editor at Entertainment Weekly. I am so excited to introduce our guest tonight, who will not only be discussing his incredible work on The Sinner, but his remarkable career thus far. So please join me in welcoming Bill Pullman.
Thank you for. It's good to see that last part on the big screen. Yeah. Niagara Falls. A lot of bang for the buck there.
I think it's so fascinating that someone such as yourself with over 100 credits to your name had never done a prolonged role on a TV series before. And from what I understand, you were actively avoiding that because you didn't want to get stuck in a rut of playing the same character day in and day out. But as we see here, you've played the role of Detective Ambrose for 2 seasons now, and going into 3 seasons, you are the through line connecting this whole series. What changed for you that convinced you to do something like this, and what was most surprising for you?
Yeah, that was probably all my worst instincts are on play as I'm listening to this. I thought, what's my problem that I couldn't be doing a series, but I actually, there was one series that could have gone on, 1600 Penn, and it didn't, But I was the one who, after 13 episodes, and I come into the studio and I see that there's people crying and everything, and they'd just gotten the word that it wasn't going to be picked up. And I was thinking, I'm happy. I like this. 13 is fine. Let's move on to other things. But I think because I didn't really grow up watching a lot of TV series, so I didn't realize what a great privilege it is to have a character that you are building through seasons, and I was just ignorant. But I feel very lucky to be working on this one with Derek Simonds, who's the writer, producer, and a great group of actors, a lot of New York actors, which is a real privilege to have a lot of good characters. Yeah, really can see it, and it's set in New York, so upstate, but which is where I grew up, so it's quite a bit that's close to the bone, with this series. So that all those things working into making it a pretty exceptional experience.
And the showrunner, Derek, he, from what I understand, had you involved behind the scenes. He had you in the writer's room, and you had input on this character and perhaps some of the plot lines eventually. What was that experience like? I imagine for many actors that's a dream, to be asked, where do you think this character should go? Where do you think the story should go? At the same time, quite daunting.
Yeah, it was pretty naturally part of the process because of Derek's self-confidence, I guess. Not every producer would say, let's bring the actor in and see what he thinks. It would slow things down or get awkward. But he's so comfortable in his own skin. He's not done a lot of television himself, but he's trained in Jungian therapy. So as one of his many side aspects. So he's got an interest in all this stuff of that I think would interest us a lot, which is, psychological behavior that is, especially a lot of things that are not that are working inside our psychology that we're not objectively aware of. So all that Jungian dream work and everything, he does workshops to build character from dreams and things. So, and he has worked with a bunch of different directors. He did it with Jessica, and before the pilot, of the first season. I told him I didn't want to do it, but it was something she was excited to do, but I didn't think I needed to do it. I have too many dreams as it is, and but I think that side of the being in the writer's room that was really interesting was in the first season, trying to understand why Ambrose was, his right hand wasn't always admitting what his left hand was up to, and what would inform someone like that. So I went in and would talk. We would have a couple sessions early on and one later, so it wasn't a real routine, but it very for a couple hours every time. And I think what I talked about was some similar sense of what a character is who has been abandoned, early trauma that he was abandoned, and that we kind of following that into why he had this a little bit of masochistic streak in the first season, and the abandonment at a young age, is sometimes not intentional. It's not like your mother leaving you behind, but if she had a psychiatric illness, then it's unintentional abandonment, and the consequences sometimes of that is someone who doesn't trust intimacy and afraid to become vulnerable to another person, so needing to always stay distant in case it happens again. You don't want to rely on somebody that might disappear on you. And those kind of patterns were what we were talking about, but I thought this was all just subtext that was help the writers and think about why that was going on. Then Derek calls me before the second season and goes, "We're really wanting to use all that information and make it part of the story." So that was a real surprise. And my mother had a psychiatric break when I was 7, and it's really impacted our family a lot. She was a very loving person, so it wasn't like it was just confusing, that she would be institutionalized in those days quite a long time. Before they didn't have the psychotropic drugs that were so ballistic as they are now, where they can really fairly well target the problem. But so we were 7 in our family, and my father was a doctor, so we were put in different homes, just because my father couldn't take care of us. And then he would collect us every weekend on Sunday, and we'd drive the hour and a half north to the psychiatric institute, and I was too young to go up there, but I would wave up to the window. This is a story that I told them in the first season when there, and then it shows up as a scene in the second season. I'm thinking, this is going deep, and I don't know if I'll climb out of this hole. But it's a scene that I think is so interesting. Ambrose is he's called back to his hometown to investigate this child that has murdered his parents, and he's troubled because of his past, and you catch it in glimpses. But at one point, he goes to the psychiatric institute to do a deposition of a woman that's in there. And it's the same one that he went to when he was a child. And, Ambrose walks up the steps and sees somebody up on a balcony, and then it reverses shots, and it's that person looking back down, and it's looking down at the 10-year-old Ambrose character, And so it's kind of a fuging between the past and the present. But it was, this has been, I'm glad I waited for this one. This is a lot cheaper than paying for therapy.
Had you ever worked on a project where you had to confront your own past, where you felt that you were maybe confronting and playing out some of your own traumas personally? before?
Well, I just I had the last show of All My Sons in London was on Saturday night, so I just flew here. I'm a little slow because of jet lag. I'm speaking a little slowly, I realize. But in that play, which is, and you're working in theater, which all of you are doing both, and, those kinds of personal experiences and backgrounds you're exploring, particularly in rehearsal, and then kind of activating some of them for performances. But it's so private, you really don't want to share that stuff with another actor. Or, it starts to really complicate the process if it's not just held inside you. So that was the first time that I'd ever had that. Though, there's a scene in Igby Goes Down where the character that I was playing has a psychiatric break. And so all that's, watching someone, living with someone who had, a number of them, was useful. I only say that in this room. You know what I'm talking about. You're so desperate to make a character work, you'll use what you're using, this data bank.
When Derek was casting this role in The Sinner, he wrote you a letter trying to convince you to join the project. And
Justine, good research. These are amazing questions. How do you know that? How did you know that?
You may have said it before in a different interview that I read online.
Yeah.
Or we may have talked about it outside, but
loose lips.
Psychic abilities, I don't know. But he mentioned a play that you had done that had really affected him called The Goat, and you had done that back in 2002. Oh, we have some fans of The Goat here tonight.
Yeah.
And so the fact that stayed with him for that long, and the fact that he referenced it to try to convince you to jump on board, is it often the case that people approach you for a project and cite something that affected them that you've done in the past?
Well, I always am amazed at the shelf life of a play. The memory that people have of a live play seems to live a lot longer in a different space in their brains than a movie, And when they talk to you about it, they'll say something. You get somebody to come up and say, "I love Spaceballs." And then and then I love The Goat. Those are very different types of love. And so I think that, and it's a great thing about New Yorkers, that because it's a rarefied thing, to be in a play. There's only so many people get to see it and everything. But I really believe that it's like the impact of a play can be a lot more significant than a movie, even though it's only seen by 1/100th of the people that saw the movie. But Derek had seen that, and his mother had reminded him that I would be a perfect person for this, for the Sinner, and because Martin was a sinner of sorts, but the story, for those of you who don't know that Edward Albee play, but it's a man at 50 who is admitting that he has had to his wife that he's exposed as having had a love for someone that he's kept secret, and I said someone, but it's something. It's a goat. You'll want to see this play. It's one of those big plays. And then there was also other things in the scripts when he had all those references to trees and nature and everything. That side of Ambrose, that was so much a part of me, and he didn't know that about me. So it was really extraordinary to get that letter and read the scripts, and it felt like it had a fated quality, like I was fate to come to me.
I had also heard that Mel Brooks cast you in Spaceballs after seeing you in a show as well. So I just think that's interesting, like on the spot, right? So.
Well, yeah, I think he and Anne Bancroft came to see this a really wild piece of theater in L.A. called Barabbas. Michel de Gelderode, the Belgian Flemish playwright. It was a story of the Barabbas who was spared by Pontius Pilate, and when the crowd was asked who do they wish to save, and he's traumatized by it. But it was directed in a very wild fashion by a Norwegian director. Jesus was a woman with her hair shaved off. Mel was up for it and cast me in Spaceballs because of that play.
So do all the avant-garde theater you can.
Yeah, but
it's a great segue.
I was always thinking he was making that up because it seemed funny to him that he cast me. But then in Malice, I did scenes with Anne, and I asked her then, was that at all real? And she said, absolutely. He didn't have any trouble seeing me as Barabbas with a beard and chained and rampaging around, and perfect Lone Star.
But also what I really enjoyed about this show is the fact that it explores someone grappling with an aspect of their sexuality that they don't necessarily understand, and we rarely see that on screen with characters over 50, over 60. So what was it like exploring that when we seldom see that as audiences?
Yeah, there was. I always was. You get in there and do your stuff, and then coming out of those scenes, you'd pass some of the crew, and that I hadn't realized that this might be disturbing to them, They were looking at me like, I was just joking. You seemed such a nice guy at the craft service before we started shooting this. This is awful. But, I think Derek is really, interested in pushing that envelope. And we have a constant dialectic about what is said and what needs to be said and what is interior and what, just watching those last beats of this scene, it's surprising how there isn't really a lot said about what the kid is thinking and what I'm thinking, but it seems as though it's enough. You can kind of see that this happy moment is also clouded by the fact that this kid killed 2 people. And now he's on his way, but is that the best? And Ambrose kind of having to say goodbye to this kid who had meant so much to him, and in ways more successful at being intimate with him than with Carrie. That last goodbye with them. We did so many variations of that, and we had more dialogue and everything. But it came down to, she said, "I'll see you later," and he says, "Okay." So, kind of a brave, I thought, of Derek to kind of, and the director to bring it in that way.
When a character like this struggles with communication, there's so much that you have to portray without dialogue, and specifically the way that his past is manifesting in his dreams, in his physical form. Could you speak to that, how to communicate something to the audience that the character isn't even able to communicate?
Yeah, I think there's kind of maybe one way of breaking down characters is hiders and finders, and Ambrose is in a way a hider because he is living a life that's a lie of some sort, or he's living in some kind of bifurcated way. But it's interesting that also he has then a perception as a finder of sensing that in other people. So, that side of him, the interesting thing was discovering that there is kind of, when you are inside a secret, there's some part of you that is wanting to be exposed, maybe at some levels, and I don't know if that's conscious or not. So I would never think of that as part of it, but I was thinking there is an exhilaration that you might be exposed, and that is a kind of wakefulness, a kind of sense of heightened exchange with people. So you're, that idea that if you're with someone who might sense something from you, or you're sensing something similar from them, especially with Jessica, that first season, sensing that, that in a way, in the last episode of that season, that was some of the most exposing things get said by Ambrose to her in that car scene, and that kind of sense of being able to trust someone to actually kind of be open to each other was, I think, part of what gets, because you shoot it over 4 months, and that's a long time to hold all these things together, and I had to really develop ways of that. I can live unconsciously quite a bit. You just show up you got your text and you got that down, but but if I need to stop myself and do check in, and I build in more like theater than I thought, where like with the play, I'd have to start an hour and a half before all my sons, and I couldn't cut that down. I kept thinking, it's just an hour and a half in the first previews, and I'll get it down to 15 minutes or something, but it stayed an hour and a half. So.
I want to go back to your origins in theater, because I didn't realize this about you. You actually have an MFA in directing, and because you have so many roles to your name, I just assumed you'd been acting your entire adult life, but you actually started a little bit late, and you had worked as a theater instructor, and I'm curious, what has that, or had that enabled you to bring to your work that maybe you wouldn't have been able to if you just started acting?
Yeah, I did. I suppose that's like classic late bloomer or something. But I was always, interested in. I started out in building construction program in a vocational school, and then started interested in theater. But then went, and at that point, I felt like I was taking acting classes, but. And getting a lot out of it, but the directing, I was really learning more about more aspects of the storytelling and everything, and I was always curious about that. So that's why I went. And at that point, I really did think I had gone to England, and when I was an undergraduate, when 20 years old, and I went to the Old Vic and saw plays there. But the RSC was doing seasons there for about 4 or 5 years, and it was in that period. And saw Nicole Williamson, and saw some incredible performances that I had not been in New York City. I was from upstate New York and spent much time in the city. So I thought, wow, how do you make theater happen? That's interesting to me. And so I thought maybe I'd be a regional theater director at that point. And I thought making stories about local situations. In that point in America, that in the 70s, there was a lot of belief that the American theater was, not just New York. And there was this embrace that it was going to be more regional. I think the Reagan years, kind of cut that back. There was a lot of arts funding that got cut back. And so, and then I was in Montana doing, I was kind of doing regional theater, and I was head of working with a Shakespeare and the touring Shakespeare company and teaching and directing plays, and I just realized I had an itch that had not been scratched, I guess. But
I want to make sure I get to some of the audience questions. Can you tell us what was your experience working with David Lynch? How was it?
That was as many people who ever worked with him, it seems to change a lot of people. I was surprised after doing Lost Highway how immediately after several of the actors were saying, I'm not going to do an acting thing. I want to do something else. And Patricia said, I want to write a novel. And Balthazar Getty said, I'm going to work in clay. And I think it's because he's so intoxicating, and to be in his presence, because you feel palpably that he's an artist, and that in a capital A artist, that he sees the joy of making things in many mediums, and he's a painter, and he's musician, and he directs and writes, and there's just like somehow he and I remember him saying that he thought he could be happy without anything, that he could be happy in a small apartment as long as he had some paints with him or something, and that you can make things out of this without a lot of resources. And so that was the intoxicating thing about working with him.
One more. Can you tell us a time where an audition wasn't going well and you were able to turn it around?
Whoa. It was going well and I turned it around?
Wasn't going well and you were able to turn it around?
To being bad.
No, it was not going well and you were able, it somehow worked out in your favor.
Oh, okay, good. I've had the opposite. This is going so well. Oh, I'm embarrassed. That they turned it around. Turn it around. Well, in a way, I remember there was a period where I had this strange kind of super ego thing come through where I just felt so centered that I felt like I was the vacuum cleaner of parts. Like I could that was around like in the early 90s, and I was just, I just was really intrigued by it. But that's it. When was that? Trying to remember. I'm just thinking, all I can think of is the ones I didn't turn around all of a sudden. I think there's also sometimes you're auditioning for things that you don't feel you're right for. And I really have been very aware and remembering a lot of that because our youngest son is an actor, Louis Pullman, and he's had some great luck, and he was in this Bad Times at the El Royale movie, had a very interesting part in that, and then he's in the Catch-22 series that George Clooney just did, and now he's doing Top Gun 2 sequel. So he said, he's had some good shakes, but a couple of times he's read scripts and he talked to me. He said, I don't think I'm right for this part, but I got to go in for it, And I had that for, was it Midnight Run? Do you remember Robert De Niro and Charles Grodin? And I had gone in there for the part of the bounty hunter. There's a part of the bounty hunter, and they said, yeah, you know that. And, I was real young, and the casting director said, there's no reason why you should come for this because you're too young. And I said, I got an idea. And I really would love to go in for that part. And I had these glasses that I had fixed with a Band-Aid, where it broke in there. And it was this bounty hunter that I was just thinking would be I could kill this. I can really kill this. And, and I went in there and I killed it, but then they talk for a while. I'm out in the hallway, and then the casting person comes out and goes, "That was very good, but you're too young for it." And they ended up casting a guy kind of more in his 50s or something. But yeah. But they said, "You're really good for the accountant part." And I went and auditioned for this part that I thought, I don't really think I can get this. And I mean, I never had this miserable feeling of like failure because I kept auditioning and they kept saying, it's really close, but let's audition again. And I was auditioning with De Niro, who I'd never met or been in the room before with. And I'm thinking, it's going to see me floundering. I just didn't have, you either got a take that you really believe in or you're just faking it. You're just trying to get a job or something. You don't really know what you're doing. And I think they had Grodin already involved and they were looking for, that the negotiation wasn't pleasant or something, and they were looking to have another option, and so eventually they called it off, and give it to Grodin and pay him what he wants. But I was so relieved when it was over because it was just miserable.
Thankfully, there were many, many others that worked out for you.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you.